This is Becoming a Blockbuster YA Author, the series that will guide you through writing and publishing a hit young adult or middle grade novel, and will train your brain to think like a best-selling author. A solid antagonist has the power to make a story brilliant. And likewise, a poorly thought out antagonist guarantees a weak plot. Imagine the Dark Knight with a less quirky Joker, or a Voldemort with no backstory. Imagine Thor without his siblings. Antagonists make a story. So let's spend this episode putting some effort into how to build the best possible antagonist for your novel. We'll do this in 11 steps. Feel free to follow along in the worksheet linked below, or else you can fill it out after you're done listening. So note this episode assumes you're writing a story with a human antagonist, but if you're writing a man versus nature or a man versus self conflict, consider the word character to be like a metaphor for the opposing force, and just apply as much of these principles as you can. A non-human antagonist can still be epic and three-dimensional. 1. An identity to mirror the protagonist. So to form your antagonist identity, you can follow one of two molds. First, you can make your protagonist and antagonist share all of the same qualities, except for one key moral difference that makes them enemies. So for example, they can have an unsettlingly similar upbringing, evenly matched skills and strengths, and they might even be similar in appearances. The second mold is to make these two characters the total opposite in every way. So for example, they could embody darkness and light, compassion and ruthlessness, royalty and poverty. Whether you make your protagonist and antagonist eerily similar or staunchly opposite is up to you. 2. A problematic core belief. Whichever you choose, your antagonist needs a strong core belief that makes your protagonist oppose them. Decide on what this core belief is for your antagonist. So for example, Marvel's Hela believes she has a birthright to Asgard's throne. And once there, she believes it's her duty to start a ruthless conquest of the 9 realms. When deciding on your antagonist's core belief, you'll also have to come up with a backstory that made this belief come into being. It can't come out of nowhere. So for Hela, she used to ride alongside her father, Odin, on that very conquest, until he had enough of her and cast her aside. So this backstory shapes her into who she is today. 3. A sympathetic quality. Something in their backstory should make the reader identify with them, or at least understand how they came to be so flawed. For example, in Harry Potter, Voldemort had a lonely childhood devoid of love. Learning this gives the reader a revelation about why he's so horrible and adds a realistic dimension to his character. Because people don't just randomly become evil, something makes them that way. So think back to the methods we talked about in the episode about opening scenes for making a protagonist sympathetic. You can also apply these to the antagonist. Maybe they're really nice to animals, or they once did a heroic act and they got ruthlessly punished for it, or the person they care about most in the world was murdered. 4. A fear and a weakness. Part of having a sympathetic backstory is that it gives them a fear and a weakness. For Voldemort, his failure to understand love results in his downfall. He also fears death and will do anything to avoid dying, including ripping his soul into 7 pieces, which of course defines Harry Potter's goal and moves the plot. 5. Normal, non-villainous qualities. So an antagonist needs to come across as realistic. Decide on some normal, non-villainous things about them, like their friends, their hobbies and interests. If you've written their backstory thoroughly, it should actually seem like they could have a whole book of their own, where they're just a flawed hero, same as any other. 6. Special power. So of course, the reason that they're in this story is because they're the perfect opposition to your protagonist. Give them a strength that will be the most exciting to pit against your hero. Superior intelligence, strength, charisma, actual powers. So for example, in Die Hard, Hans Gruber is a criminal mastermind, which is the perfect opposition for a cop like John McClane. Consider also whether your antagonist has used this power to do villainous things before the story began. You can use the aftermath to your advantage before you ever introduce the villain. You can show how others react to him, like everyone being so afraid of Voldemort that they can't even say his name. Or you can show the effects of her wrath, like the velociraptor attack in the prologue of Jurassic Park. 7. A goal that causes problems for the protagonist. Drawing from their backstory and beliefs, it's time to decide what they want to achieve during the course of your story. So they might be competing for the same goal as the protagonist, like the pursuit of a relic, or the opposite, like ruling the kingdom with hostility. As you write your story, everything your antagonist does should be in line with their desire to reach their goal. And this causes problems for the protagonist, who of course doesn't want this goal to be attained. So with this conflict, now you have a plot. And this is really the pinnacle of your antagonist's character design. Making a strong opposing force comes down to giving them a goal that opposes everything the protagonist wants. And, of course, a strong motivation for having that goal. So these first 7 steps provide a lot of information about the character, and while you want to establish their goal, power, and motives early on, when it comes to their backstory, you need to strategically show snippets of it as the story requires. So avoid the urge to info dump the whole backstory. Let the reader piece together who the antagonist is and how they ended up this way. Like casually show the thing that makes the antagonist sympathetic, or have a secondary character refer to a past incident. You can be crafty with it. Readers love a puzzle. So now that you fully understand your antagonist and probably feel a little connection to them, let's spend the final 4 steps fleshing out the plot from their perspective. Number 8 is the story's beginning. Have a scene near the beginning that shows the antagonist's power. For example, in Jessica Jones, Season 1, which has, in my opinion, one of the best villains of all time, we see the terrifying power of Kilgrave over and over as he forces victims to obey his demands, all in the name of getting to Jessica. His goal and motivation trickle out bit by bit, but the power is all there right away, and it really grabs the audience. 9, their character arc. The antagonist's arc will probably be a destructive one that involves deepening self-hatred and anger. Decide how your antagonist evolves throughout the story. For example, Marvel's Loki battles with his own trickster nature for several movies, flipping between a blind desire for power and his underlying love for his brother Thor. Make sure they change throughout the story and aren't the exact same from beginning to end. 10, gaining an edge. A great antagonist forces the protagonist to make tough choices and to decide what kind of person they want to be. So at some point in your story, your antagonist should force your protagonist to make tough choices. For example, in The Dark Knight, the Joker forces Batman to choose between saving his love interest and saving Harvey Dent. Consider what your protagonist's weakness or fear is. Your antagonist should be really good at attacking this. For example, in The Hunger Games, Katniss's biggest fear is losing her little sister. So the Capitol threatens the life of Katniss's little sister multiple times, which forces her to comply with their demands. 11, defeat. When the antagonist is defeated at the end, it's because the protagonist came out stronger after enduring the story's tests and trials. They learned something that the antagonist didn't, which is the theme. They learned how to exploit the antagonist's weakness, and they became enlightened, while the antagonist sinks in their own flaws. So consider how the protagonist will defeat the antagonist. For example, Voldemort refuses to feel remorse and accept that he's only human. And because of his own ego and his greed and his failure to understand that love is the most powerful magic of all, Harry is able to use the power of the Elder Wand against him. Now you've got everything you need to build the most badass antagonist possible for your story. Use the worksheet to review everything we talked about and fill in your antagonist personality and story. If you're taking our coaching program, we look forward to talking about this with you and helping you to identify the qualities that will push forward your plot and oppose your protagonist. For free guides, worksheets, and to apply for personal coaching, go to blockbusterya.com.